Well, I think this would be a first. So we've got 2 cars in the workshop on rotisseries at the same time, because I normally only do 1 car at a time and I only have the 1 rotisserie, but Adam and Kylie have the same one. So they've brought theirs down with all their bracketry that they made to put the car on it, and the reason I'm doing that now is I need to get the chassis painted, so that's over here. So it's in bare metal, so I need to really get that sealed up. So we're going to pull the front off it, and I'll get that into CF black epoxy, and because it's got to go back over once we get the underside done. So what you've seen us do inside the car, we're now going to do underneath, and then we'll seal that up with urethane before it goes into stone guard. So I'll get some of that done this week with Steve, and I've taken the opportunity this week, Darren's here this week for a couple of days, so I've taken the opportunity to get the outside finished, a lot of the little bits and pieces in around the door jambs, and now we'll get it up on its side and get underneath done, and then it goes into poly before it goes back together to get blocked out again. So along with all that underside of the car, what we're in the process of doing is cleaning up all of the suspension components. So things like this that are bare metal. So we'll give that a good clean up first to make sure we get all the greases and oils off it, because you can actually feel it's like quite greasy. And then once again we'll go CF black, and then I'll put some base coat and then some matte or satin clear. So we'll show you that process as well. Righto, so I said I'd show you the process. So these are all those parts. So some had paint on them that sanded up really good, and others, and this one here was the same. So it's even almost like an E-coat, so I've just sanded those, and then the others are all bare metal that we've either taken the paint off them or they were just cast. Now, I'm going to repeat myself over and over and over on this show, but not everybody watches every episode. Cleanliness. So prep sole, they've been done already. I'm ready to paint now, so I'm going to go over and wipe them all again, and then I'm going to go over with a tack rag or a tack cloth. This is the Mercer brand one. I never realised just how big an influence these can have on the quality of your work. So you go over and blow them off with air, and then paint them, so I'm going to wet on wet this through 3 stages. Any little tiny bit of dust is going to build up and get worse. So I'll run over with compressed air and a tack rag and wipe all of those parts down, and then I'll start with the products. So I'm going to use the CF black epoxy, then we'll go base coat, and then we'll go with the satin clear. this is a good one where you've got to be careful. So we've got the data sheet, but when we read here again, and what I've already showed you is the flash off time's only 3 to 5 minutes. If you're using as a wet on wet paint system, which is what we're doing, we've got to allow 30 minutes air dry at 25 before top coating. So I'm going to use base coat now, which is a top coat. So now I need to wait 30 minutes before I can now apply that base coat over the top of the epoxy. Righto, so more data sheets. So the base coat is, you can mix that two ways. You can mix it just as a normal base coat, which is half thinner, half paint. But you can also, as a standard, but you can also activate. So you can actually add a hardener to it. Now, we did that a bit with some of the work we did on Boss XC. Helps with adhesion a little bit. Just doing brackets and things like I'm doing now, I'll just use the normal standard mix, but you can activate it so that it will go off. But if you've got any paint left over, then it's obviously going to dry and be finished with. Once again, it gives you all the information you need. And when we look down here to overcoat time, we're looking at 15 minutes before we can go to clear coat. So we've got a 5 to 10 minute flash off and then 15 minutes before clear coat. And I think this just highlights that if you've got one bracket to do and you're going to do 2 coats of epoxy, 2 coats of colour, black on black you probably only need 1, and then 2 coats of clear, all those wait times, you've probably got about 2.5 hours. So if you take a part to your panel beater and ask him to paint one part, understand why the guy is going to frown on you, because it's going to take him 2 to 3 hours of process, and it's hard to walk away and go and do something else. So ideally you try and fill the booth up and do it all at the same time. Now the reason I'm using a clear coat is this particular product. So there's a semi-gloss and a matte in the Deltron obviously, and it's D8115-117. This product was developed for all of these matte cars that have come out. When you look at the sheet here, it'll actually show you Lamborghini, Mercedes, Smart, BMW. So all these cars that are coming out from the factory with a full body matte finish, that product's got to be very durable and it's got to obviously match what the factory had done. So this is PPG's product, and by mixing 50-50 of these two, you end up with that factory look. I like that look for things like what I'm doing now, suspension and brackets, but I also find probably within a week of it being painted, it goes very, very hard and is very durable for using on parts like I'm doing now. So that's why I'm using a clear coat. And it's probably a little bit more expensive than if you're just going to go and do a direct gloss with a bit of mattening base, but this will give you a better job. There you go, so that's a really nice durable finish, a nice satin appearance, really does come up nice. Taking the opportunity to come up to PPG this morning up here at the training centre and have a talk to John. Morning, John.
Morning.
So we spent about an hour in the traffic this morning, which was fun. You love Sydney, don't you?
Yeah, it was great.
But I mean, that's part of what happened. So the reason I wanted to come up here is there's this whole myth about the products that we all use in the industry, and I really want to have a chat to you about, we're at that stage now where we're doing epoxies and sealing all these different substrates, as you guys call them, which is, you know, the steel and the aluminium and all those things. And I've always found it interesting, and I hear a lot of debate about the fact that there's so many different products.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get a bit of feedback from you. And the reason I'm talking to John is John and I have worked together for 25, 30 years on various projects, and John's been at PPG that long. But he's also a qualified spray painter.
Yeah.
And then worked in the training part of PPG and then product development, and of course now in sales. So he's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of background and seen a lot of these products evolve over the years. And the thing I'd like to talk to you about, John, is right from the start where we go acid etchers, epoxy primers, CF primers, high build primers, there's all these different things. So if we can initially to talk about mild steel firstly, and that process of those different primers that you have, and why we're using them.
Yeah, look, I think where I'm fortunate is I get to see the product in development phase and understand why is it we need to bring out a new epoxy or an etch primer. And a lot of it's based on either a customer requirement, customer request, substrate request. You know, substrates keep changing. And
if I can cut you off for a second, when you're talking customer, you're talking Ford or
customer
GM or someone.
Customer is Ford. It's Howard Astle. It's the guy in the panel shop. It's the guy.
Well, obviously, you're not going to create a product just for me, but realistically,
for the Howard Astles,
types.
That's right. Who are out there, you know, building cars and you know, recreating cars and restoring cars. So, you know, if you look at a car that's being restored, you know, you might have bare steel, you might have galvanized steel, aluminium, fiberglass. So it's difficult to say, look, just use that one product, and that's all you'll have to use, because, you know, you'll say, look, John, I'm doing a car inside, I just want to put an epoxy on that's shiny and not have to touch it. So, okay, I can't give you this one, but I can give you this one.
Yep.
Because this will do what you require. So it's about making sure we've got a product that will cater to what the people that are restoring the cars, repairing the cars, rebuilding the cars, what is it they need. And
or building a truck, because I mean this is where a lot of the products come from. So just if we can try and, you know, shorten it, but like an acid etch.
Yeah.
Explain to me an acid etch.
So
explain to these guys.
So there's a little bit of misunderstanding as well in terminology. So people go, you didn't use an etch. So an etch, people are saying something that will stick to the metal. Okay, so an acid etch primer is designed especially for aluminium and hard to stick to substrates, surfaces. So
like a galvanized, so like a fuel tank.
Fuel tank. Right, you know, if you're doing an old Bentley or an old, you know, relic that's made from complete aluminium surface, you would put an acid etch because you would get better adhesion to that particular substrate. You know, people want to paint engines and brake components and all different types of.
So if you use an acid etch, what then goes over that? Because being an acid, obviously there's limitations in what can go over.
An acid etch you would use and then prime over it. You know, but if you want to use body filler, you wouldn't mix it with acid etch primers. They're not very compatible. The actual.
So if I've got an old fuel tank and it's galvo, and I acid etch it, and I want to put some filler in it, what do I do then? Epoxy over the acid etch?
Epoxy over the acid etch.
Okay.
So it would be a two-step process.
Yep.
And then you would be safe.
Okay, and obviously we can go and read the data sheets about when and how long.
So if you're using an acid etch or an epoxy, basically you want it to stick to the surface. So an acid etch is good because if the surface is, you know, 95% clean, it'll work its way through and stick. Epoxy's like a really good clean surface to stick to.
And but they both do the same thing. You explained to me before, epoxy is more like a glue.
Yes.
Than something that's biting in.
That's right. So it sticks to the surface, it bonds chemically versus an acid etch.
Okay, so epoxy now is a word we see a lot of.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes part of a bigger name, and sometimes it's just epoxy.
Yeah.
So I know with the products I've been or have used, so there's the CF Black I use a lot of if I'm doing brackets and things, which comes out of the industrial, so trailers and truck chassis and those sorts of things. So what's the structure of that?
So there's two types of epoxies. There's a an amine, which is like araldite glue, and then there's the one that we use in the custom world, which has an isocyanate hardener. So just quickly, CF is chromate free. Chromates were banned.
Yep.
So you have to have a chromate free product, and that's what the CF stands for.
Okay.
Nothing more.
There you go, I learn something every day.
So something easy, right? So if you have an amine cured epoxy like an araldite, you can put a coat down and you can paint over it. So in the truck world, they use these type of epoxies to put colour over the epoxy. With our world, we want to put body filler on. So these are a bit stickier and chewier. What we want is something that's harder and we can sand, so we use the isocyanate-based hardener. So DP616.
Righto, so that solves that. So CF is great, and I just did a whole lot of brackets and things for the muscle car yesterday actually. And I like that because I can then put base coat and then use the satin clear. Gives me a nice hard surface. I don't plan on rubbing it at all. It's like bang, 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 and the job's done. When we go then into epoxy urethane primer, and obviously DP616 is what we're using on this car, and I've been using it forever and I love the product. I'm not going to go into that now, but there are other epoxies. So there's the 2K, which is in the Epotec.
Epotec, from our Protec range,
Now, it's a different product again to the DP616. Explain us a little bit about what the
Epotec's a great product. Again, been around for a long time, but it goes rock hard. It's fantastic. If you want to paint on an undercarriage or internal areas or just paint something that you don't want to coat, the Epotec's great. You know, you can use that, but when you try and sand it, it's quite hard. So
is there a timeline with that? Does it go hard straight away? Or if I know a lot of people use it on the outside. A lot of sandblasters use it. It's very cost effective. They'll put it on the outside. If you've got that on, if you use it on the outside of a car, of a build, is there a timeline where it's not too bad to sand and then it goes hard, or is it pretty much hard?
Once it cures, it's hard. It goes rock hard. And the other thing with something like that epoxy is you can't use it wet on wet with a spray polyester. So here's where DP616 comes in. We can put body filler, hand applied over it. We can use it wet on wet with spray polyester, with primer, so it's a bit more universal. Whereas something like Epotec is not as universal. And then an etch primer is basically only has one function, to stick to the metal.
So I like the 616 primarily because I can put it on. If I want to do a little bit of welding on the edges, it doesn't fry up. It just changes to a red colour and it's really functional that way. But it doesn't, I'm not looking for a massive amount of build film out of the epoxy, which I've spoken to other custom guys and they like the Epotec because it gives them some build. Should they be using it to get build, or is that just the nature of the product?
It depends what you want the build for. If you just want to paint it and leave it, the build's good. But you know, if you're ready to prime the job or spray poly it, you can put a coat of the 616 on in 20 minutes. You know, you can have a good look at it and say, am I ready to prime it? Have I missed something? Did I miss a ripple? Did I miss some deep scratches? You can give it a quick sand. You know, so you've still got that option. Once you put an amine epoxy on or the Epotec type epoxy, then it's wet for a long time. You've got to wait for it to completely chemically dry, and then you've got to sand it and start again. Okay, so just to sort of recap, because this gets a little bit confusing. So we've got the acid etch for the hard stuff, and we go to an epoxy, and we've got a couple of different products there, or 3 different products, the CF, for the brackets and the industrial chassis, those sorts of things. When we then go to that next stage, I like to use the epoxy almost like a trace coat. So I'll do the 616, then I'll do my filler, then I'll do epoxy again, and I use normally a 1.4, where I know it probably should be a 1.8, because I'm just looking to get a nice coat on there to seal it off, and if I'm happy, I'm ready to go. And I'm not looking to get a whole lot of build film out of the epoxy, because I'm either going to prime it with a high build primer, or if I think I need to, depending on the job, I'm going to go with a poly. And a poly, guys, is basically filler in the gun, isn't it? Absolutely, liquid body filler.
Liquid body filler. So what that does is enables you to put that nice flat film of filler on there that you can then block out. So before we get to that though, I know you guys still have a couple of direct-to-metal primers. Now, I sort of see this a little bit, you know, we hear people talking about products, especially in the US, that you don't need epoxy, or I've got this primer that's epoxy and it's high build and it does everything. And I can just whack it on my bare metal, block it down and paint it. Now, I find that a bit hard to believe, that a company the size of PPG has got all these products and then someone else says, no, just whack this on. You get any sort of feedback that we can?
Yeah, look, we do have direct-to-metal primers in the chassis industry. Direct-to-metal primer and top coats
so that's
are common. Delfleet, now in our CPC range, it's common for that type of work. It requires a lot more thorough preparation, but they don't really do much with body filler. Right, it's just paint it, bare metal, we clean it, we paint it, we're done. Filter and blast profile.
And longevity, they're not, not necessarily looking for the same. Has it got the same principle?
Just different properties, right? So what we're dealing with is somebody who's building a car that's worth, minimum probably these days 100 grand. Up to
for parts.
For something cheap, up to a couple of $1 million.
Yep.
So our approach is, why shortcut something if you're spending that much time, money, and you want to keep it for another, the car's already 50 years old, you want to keep it for another 50, why take a shortcut?
Yep.
It's all about process. This process requires epoxy body filler. This process requires epoxy primer or epoxy spray poly. If someone's going to spend, $1 million with you, maybe you should take the polyester step. If the car, if you can spend more time on the body filler and get it smoother and straighter, you can go to a high build primer. It's all relative.
So this is how difficult it gets because there's so many different products.
Yeah.
So what we've done, or we're going to do with this, is I've got the chassis to paint on this.
Yeah.
So I've got some Delfleet, which I haven't used before.
Yeah.
From these guys, and we're going to do some of that because there's a process that they use, in the heavy industrial side of things that I believe we can use on the chassis in this car.
Absolutely.
Now, that works good if you're in, a shop and you're going to do 10 chassis in the year.
Yeah.
But for a guy at home that's sort of just doing 1 or 2 pieces, it's probably not cost effective because you've got to buy a different hardener and a different thinner.
Sure.
But what I'm going to do is venture down that track just to be able to show you some of the options that are out there. John, this is really good. I'm going to pull it up for a minute and we'll grab a coffee or something and we'll come back and maybe delve into some specifics a bit closer. So you can see just how complicated it is, and we need to make sure, or you need to make sure when you're looking for product, is search out a PPG distributor and get the information, get the data sheets. And I'm now in the process of putting up whatever we're using, we'll put the data sheets up on asteldesign.com so you can go there and access those. It's been a privilege to have worked for so many years with PPG. With their help over the last 25 years, we've been able to come up with some of the best paint in Australia. And I can say that from experience, having worked on things like Tailspin and also Boss XC, working with these guys to actually come up with the sort of finish we need on some of the cars that you can see there. Whether that's with their help or on my own, we've achieved some unbelievable results with such a great product. Thank you, PPG. Righto, so underside. Now got the car into the rotisserie, gives us the opportunity to work on the underside, much easier than trying to lay on your back and do it. I wouldn't do a car myself without one. Fortunately, Adam and Kylie had one at Perry's garage and they already made all the mounts, so I'm just utilising theirs because mine's being used for the panel van at the moment. So what I've been doing, well, Steve and I have been sanding all this down. So we've used a range of products. Firstly, the Merca. So I've put actually nearly a 10mm interface pad on there. So that's a foam pad, gives it a little bit of movement. So that's enabled us to run over all of those areas where we can. And I've been using 240 in the Galaxy range, and that's come up really good. And all of the bits you can't get to, I've been using this foam back in a 240. So, there goes the machine. So, love that product. I've been using it for years. So it's the Gold Flex Soft, and we normally have it here in 240 400 and 800, and it's really good when you're trying to get around all these round areas. Easy to hang on to, gets in really good. So working our way through to get all that done. Some of the areas like along here, up in here and around through here, we've just been using the wire wheel, just a basic little wheel. It's a Josco brand, and I get those at Bunnings. So around there, and now that we've got this new Merca battery grinder, I've been using that with Scotch-Brite, but also these little fellas, the Abranet Max. So that's been a 120 grit. So I can put that on there and I can vary the speed, which makes it good. So all these areas where it's been plug welded, I can clean up with that. And what my plan is now is from here forward, I'll extend the DP616 epoxy down to this line, and then I'm going to put the CF black epoxy over the underside. Now the CF I found out the other day, and you'll see John talking about it, chromate free, so it's more an industrial product. So my plan is to spray all the underside with that. That will enable us to go around with urethane then and fill up all of the gaps to the left to tidy it up, and then I'm going to put a stone guard over it before we put some actual paint on it. So that's what we've been doing at the moment. It's all part of that primers and epoxies to get everything sealed up so we can move forward and start to do some paint. So we've got a variation of different substrates to work with here. So this area here is the original floor, and you can see a little bit of red here and there. That's the original red primer from the factory, and then all of the main floors are new. So it had like an E-coat on it, so I've given that a quick sand, and then it's got these additional rails that have been added and some new inner tubs and stuff, so there's a bit of new metal, and then a little bit of fabrication as well with the new shocky mount because the springs have been moved inwards. So we're just sort of cleaning everything up the best we can, remembering it is the underside of the car, and we'll make it as clean as we can. I'll clean all that down with metho water and then get it in the booth, mask it up and get that CF black on it. Righto, so we'll just touch briefly on spray guns. Now we're going to do a bigger episode on this when we do colours and clears because there's so much technology and information, but clearly the gun's important as well when we're doing epoxies, primers and polys.
Yeah.
So give us a bit of a rundown, John, what people should be looking at doing with what style of gun for a starter and what sort of nozzle size to use all these products. Yeah,
look, obviously we're big believers in SATA. You know, we sell the SATA range, we know it back to front, we know it well, but what's really important is the nozzle size. So especially for primers, if you're using epoxy primers, etch primers, make sure you're using a fine setup, even the wet on wet primers, so 1.4 is ideal. And then you could buy a second nozzle set instead of a second spray gun if you're looking to save some cost, and use a 1.8 or a 2mm for your high build primers. If the nozzle size is too small, you're putting on more coats of primer and you're not going to get the film build you want. So the nozzle set is important because you're putting on less coats and getting more build with the right set. So swap those out. Think about, you know, if you're going to buy one, just have a look at that nozzle size.
Not the actual size. So I think episode 1 or 2, when I had Terry and Trev, we opted on a 1.8 with the epoxy.
Yeah.
When I did the body afterwards, I used a 1.4 because I run to your school because we work so much together, because I'm looking for that appearance and flatness. And I've only used a small amount of poly, and the biggest gun I currently have is a 1.8, and I could only use the poly at the thinnest setting. But it's so important from a build film point of view.
Yeah.
And one of the things I see about this industry is that you can have the best product in the world, but if you don't use it as per the data sheet,
absolutely. And
the data sheet gives you your pressure, your nozzle size, and your temperature.
Yeah.
And I think they're the 3 main things. I haven't left nothing there, have I?
Yeah.
So it's really important that you get all of those right, because the same thing applies. If you've got too much pressure, you've got product going everywhere and you're not getting the correct, what's the terminology, John? I guess there's a terminology about the way that lays on, and you know, I can see it when I'm talking about it.
You're not getting the wetness that you want.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah, the wetness.
The wetness. So, and the overlap, so that when the product goes on, you're getting the build film, as in the thickness of the product, but on across the board.
Yeah.
In a very uniform way. And all of these products have they're designed to have a different build film, therefore requiring a different nozzle size. So as John said, I've seen them advertised, you can buy guns that come with 2 different nozzles. In the SATA range, you can buy an adaptation kit to change it over. In my case, I've got a primer gun, which is the bottom end of the SATA range. Trying to think of a number now,
The B100?
Yep.
Yeah,
the BP100, and the one I've got is 100 years old that I think John gave me 10 years ago because it was worn out, and that's what I use. It wasn't worn out, but it was.
And it still works.
It's had a bit of work.
Yeah.
And then I go up to I've got another my 1.8 is the one we used on tailspin, which was under the start line range as a SATA gun.
Yeah.
And I'm looking to maybe upgrade that one, and then I've got the good digital SATA for doing my colours and clears. So it doesn't have to be the dearest gun, it just needs to be the right size.
That's right.
And the way the application goes on. So make sure you get all of that information correct and use the right gun to get the best result out of the best product.
Absolutely.
Righto, so pretty much ready to rock and roll. So I've just masked up the area that I don't want to paint, obviously, and filled up all the holes so I don't have the black going through on the inside. And I've been preheating, so I've got myself up to my 25 degrees that we need. And I've cleaned that and give it just a quick light tack rag. The main aim just to make sure it's clean. Once you get them up in the rotisserie and start turning them all the time, it's amazing how much stuff falls out, so try not to get too much of that in the job. So I'll get the gun ready and we'll get into it. There you go, 2 coats of CF black epoxy, and that's looking pretty sweet. It's going to be a shame to put some sound deadening over that. That's always been the plan, so I'm guessing that's what we'll stick to. Righto, so we're finally getting through all these parts. So there's always with a car, there's no end to the amount of bits and pieces you've got. Because we've got this full chassis and it's in bare metal, I really wanted to get it tidied up and get something on it. So we're going to use the Delfleet 4949, which is a direct to metal primer. So it's an industrial product, it's not recommended for doing bodywork. But I'm going to put this on here now so that I can get it all sealed up, because the car's got to go back together a couple of times, and then once we get everything painted in the colour on the car, the last time it comes apart, I'll actually give this a sand and then put some black on it. So I've got quite a few pieces to paint like this, including the inner guards, the radiator support panel. but I just need to get this chassis sealed up, so I'm going to do that today. Steve's been on the strip disc, so we've cleaned it all down with that, and then cleaned it with Prepsol, and now I'm just going to mix some product up and get it on there. We'll get 2 coats on it. That'll seal it up, and then I'll be able to sand it back when I'm ready to paint it. Well, it's been a couple of big weeks, so hopefully you're enjoying the processes that we're going through and trying to explain all of the different things. Obviously I'm starting to see some stuff go into colour now, which is nice. Next 2 weeks now, I'll be looking to try and get all of the body and all the parts into poly. Made the decision to go that way, so that's the next process. So we'll be bringing that to you in 2 weeks' time. Once I get it all into poly, then the next stage to that, we'll then start looking, the episode after will be the actual rubbing process. So I've got to reassemble the car, we'll start blocking lines, working our way to get us into primers, and then we can start to look to go to paint after that. So if you've got any questions, don't be frightened to ask, I'll get back to you with the information. If you like what you're watching, share it with your friends, click the like button, and if you haven't already done it, subscribe, and then you won't miss anything because we're doing other things besides this series. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.